Good afternoon, possibly good morning, depending on where you are listening to us from today, but want to welcome you to another great educational webinar we have here at Advanta IRA. Excited to talk with our guest again today. I've seen a lot of information lately, or a lot of news articles, I should say, lately, that dealing with this very specific topic. And that's the ability, the technology metals, the rare earth elements, and really how they are, the impact really they have on our society, and then the important notions of who's in control. And in these particular metals are becoming, and earth elements are becoming more and more crucial to our day-to-day operations. And our guest presenter today is going to talk a lot about those particular issues. We've had him on before. We're happy to have him on again to talk about this particular subject. I'll be your host today. My name is Scott Maurer. I'm Vice President of Sales here at Advanta IRA. I've been with the company for a number of years. If you have questions relating to some of the basics of IRAs, self-directed IRAs, how to make these types of investments a part of your retirement portfolio, I'm always happy to answer those questions for you. So as we go through the presentation today as well, if you have questions either on some of the basics of IRAs, you can certainly put those in the chat box on your screen. If you have more questions specifically on the content and what our guest presenter is going to talk about today with the rare earths and the strategic metals, get those questions in the chat box as well. We'll have time at the end of the presentation to get those answered. If you are listening to the recorded version of this webinar, here's my contact information on this slide. You can reach out to me, and our guest presenter will be sharing his contact information as well to reach out for those questions or concerns that you might have. Just a quick disclaimer, Advanta IRA does not provide any investment advice. We don't endorse any products. The information materials we present, we do our webinars, we do our events, are for educational purposes only. So if you have more specific questions from a tax perspective or a legal perspective, or whether or not you should or shouldn't make an investment, that is where you would want to consult with your own attorney, your tax advisor, maybe a financial advisor, to get that type of guidance. We can maybe point you in some directions of the right people to talk to for those particular issues. But again, Advanta IRA, we do not give any legal, tax, or investment advice. So always make sure you do your due diligence on any investment that you're looking to make within your self-directed IRA or IRAs in general. Just a quick background on our company. We are a self-directed IRA administrator. I'll talk about what self-directed IRAs are in just a minute for those of you who are listening or coming into the webinar and not sure really what a self-directed IRA is. But we've been in the industry almost 20 years. We hold over $2.7 billion in assets under management. I think it's almost closer to $3 billion at this point. But really, what we set ourselves apart in our industry really is through two things: either our concierge level of personal service, every account that we get, every new account, every new investor that comes to us gets paired with one dedicated account manager, one point of contact for anything that they need regarding their account, whether it's making an investment, questions on your account. You'll have that direct point of contact. And we also really are really big believers in education and getting people educated about not only self-directed IRAs, but the ancillary topics that surround that. That's why today's webinar we're featuring a speaker on a unique industry, a unique way that you can invest or different investments you can make. A lot of times we'll feature guests in multifamily real estate, CPAs talking about tax advice. So we really like to provide as much education as possible to our clients, to potential clients as well, just so that when you're getting involved in these types of accounts or making these investments, you're going in with your eyes open. So the webinars that we have, like today's webinar, we record every webinar that we do. We place those links on our YouTube page. You can go back and listen at your convenience. Or if you ever miss an event or coming in, maybe you found a different investment idea, I want to see if we've had someone on before, you can visit our YouTube page that's accessible right through our main website at advantaira.com. Like I said, we do a number of educational events, mainly webinars, but at times we also do outside seminars for other groups, and we're present in a lot of networking events throughout our local areas. For those of you who are not familiar with self-directed IRAs, talk just a moment about those, what it means to be a self-directed account. It's important to note that the word self-directed really refers more to your ability to invest in a lot of different types of assets. So using your retirement funds, your old 401ks to invest into real estate, into private loans, into metals, precious metals, strategic metals, A lot of, again, what we consider to be alternative assets. But at their core, a self-directed plan is still going to be a traditional IRA. It'll be a Roth IRA. Maybe it's a SEP or a simple if you're self-employed, or you may have a solo 401k, or if you have access to an old 401k or an old 403b plan, you can use those funds as well. So it's taking monies in these types of accounts and simply moving it to a like account with Advanta, where you can then invest into different types of assets. Again, what we consider to be alternative assets. In fact, the only investments the IRS says that you cannot make within a retirement account is you cannot invest in life insurance and you cannot invest in collectibles like antiques, artwork, things like that. Those are the only two prohibited investments, but you have to have a custodian who's willing to hold those assets, and that's what we do at Advanta. So if you're looking for something outside of the stock market, outside of mutual funds, things of that nature, that's where a self-directed IRA is what you're looking for. It's going to open up your possibility, the investment possibilities that you have in your retirement account. Like I said, we're going to talk today specifically about one specific asset class, the strategic metals and earths and rare earths that are out there. And when looking to make those investments, if you're looking to do that type of an investment inside of an IRA account, really the best way, probably the easiest way it's going to be to do it is really by setting up what we call in the industry a checkbook control IRA or a checkbook LLC, whereby this type of entity is really an investment strategy. So you would still have your self-directed IRA, whether it's a traditional or Roth, but setting up the checkbook control is a strategy to get greater control over your IRA funds. So we've certainly seen self-directed IRAs gain in popularity over the past several years, but using a checkbook control is not something that's used by many clients. It's not necessarily something you have to use in every circumstance, but it can make the investments you're looking to do inside your account easier to control, easier to manage, and give you that ability to control it. So the checkbook control LLC, which I'll describe in a little bit more detail in the next two slides, it's basically giving you, as the IRA owner, control over your entity and acting as the conduit for those IRA funds. So if you're looking to invest in, say, foreign real estate, tax deeds, other types of assets, that's where the checkbook LLC is going to give you that flexibility and control. And as we talk about metals and rare earths today, we'll talk about the fact that these assets are largely held overseas. And so having dealings with your Advanta account and overseas might be more difficult, but using an LLC is going to give you that greater degree of control. So really the two main ways people invest through an IRA account are either doing what we call the custodial or administrative account, where Advanta in this case would hold the uninvested cash, we'll make all the investments at your direction, we'll receive and deposit that income in and out of your account. When you're dealing again with foreign real estate or foreign assets or tax deeds where there's a lot of maybe in and out, there's a lot of bills being paid, or there's a lot of income that you need to keep track of, that's where this type of method makes it a little bit more cumbersome for you to have that, because you're relying on Advanta to pay all these bills at your direction, issue payment for these assets at that particular time. So it's still possible to do that, but it makes it a little bit more cumbersome. Whereas the checkbook control method allows you, through using an LLC to get a bank account open where your IRA funds are deposited into, and then you as the manager of that entity are able to make payments, receive and deposit income out of that LLC account, thereby removing Advanta IRA somewhat from that process. We're still holding your IRA, but you're now in direct control over your particular funds. And again, the checkbook structure is formed typically with an LLC. And setting up that LLC, you would still, as you would any other entity, file your articles of organization, obtain a tax ID number. You'll file those articles in whatever state you're located in or where you want your LLC to be domiciled. You list yourself as the manager of that entity, which is going to give you then the ability to act on behalf of that LLC, to set up a bank account. When you get a tax ID number, you'll set up the bank account for the LLC. As the manager, you'll need to draft an operating agreement that lists your IRA account as the member, and that's kind of important when you draft the operating agreement to use very specific verbiage for the IRA account. And we will work with you to make sure that that wording is on the document and will ultimately sign on behalf of the IRA. And then once you've provided us with that paperwork, we've received your funds from your other custodian. we can then send the cash from your IRA into this bank account for the LLC. So your IRA then holds as the investment, say 100% of the stock of this particular LLC, that particular entity. Now that the cash is in the bank account, you as that manager in that managerial role capacity buy and sell your assets directly in the name of the LLC. Now, again, as we talk today with our guest presenter and we go through the process of how this, a little bit how it works, you'll see why I think using an LLC where you're going to have more of that control directly is going to be more advantageous to you, definitely from a control perspective, maybe even from a fee perspective of not having a fee charged by Advanta each time you're buying different types of metals or making a new investment. You can handle everything through that LLC structure. So again, really excited though today to bring in our guest, Lewis O'Connor. He was on a while back with us talking about the strategic metals, talking about the rare earth investments, and really how it impacts our society. And I was excited to bring Lewis back again. I've regular reader of the news to some extent, and have noticed a lot more articles talking about this exact topic. So I thought bringing in Lewis today would be incredibly beneficial to revisit the topic, talk about some of the changes that have happened. But Lewis, how you doing today?
Great. Thank you, Scott. Thank you very much for the introduction, and I'm happy to be here with you again. Lewis O'Connor from Strategic Metals. This presentation, I'm Irish, so when somebody, if somebody from Ireland gets talking, it's hard to get them to stop. So I'm actually going to keep this very concise and short, so nobody gets bored. I mean, this sort of presentation could last like 45 minutes, 30 minutes, but I'm actually going to do it in about 10 to 15 minutes. So I'm going to move quickly. And as Scott said as well, if anybody has questions, please put them up, and Scott, feel free to interrupt me at any time, because it's nice to get sort of some back and forth and some interaction between us. So the first thing I'll just start with is to tell you, my company is Strategic Metals Invest. Now, what are strategic metals? So strategic metals, it's just an umbrella term for many different metals. As an example, you probably hear people talking about energy transition metals, defense metals, technology metals, of course, rare earth elements. And what it is they're all, you might not realize it, but they're actually talking about the same group of metal, the 17 rare earth elements that are critical to all nations' economic prosperity and increasingly military capability. So you could say they're the sort of backbone of manufacturing in this 21st century. So it's easier to say there's not an industry that doesn't use them. So I'll just give you a quick intro of why they differ, if you will, from base metals. So I'll just elaborate on the middle column there. It talks about copper and iron and lead and zinc. So what's different about rare earth elements is they do not occur naturally in the Earth's crust. So they're always a byproduct, if you will, of the mining of another resource. So gallium, which you'll hear about in a minute, is a byproduct of aluminum mining, and hafnium is a byproduct of zirconium. Now, there's 17 of them, and you could say, actually, until we found a use for them in technology and defense and aerospace, they were really wasted war materials. They were sort of mine tailings. But now that we have a use for them, what makes them complicated and expensive is because they don't occur naturally, they're chemically very, very similar, so they're found together. So when they're there, they have to be extracted, then they have to be separated, oxidized, and then remetallized into sort of high-level purity levels. So that's what makes them sort of complicated and expensive, is the process of finding them, separating them, and then remetallizing them. So key application areas, I'll come back to that more in a minute, but there's literally, nowadays there's not an industry that doesn't use strategic metals. All modern technology, defense, aerospace, energy transition, medical devices, just about every, computer chip. So just everything from microwave to, you know, tractors and jets have computer chips nowadays. So the applications are completely just global, and any industry you can think of. Now, just some key benefits to begin. They're independent of stock fluctuation. There's a strong and growing demand, which I'll come back to more in a minute. I have some charts. Limited availability. China is what we call now the rare earth superpower. Over the last 30 years, China has consolidated its position. And Scott had mentioned earlier, since we had our last webinar, he's been hearing a little bit more about these metals in the mainstream news. And the reason for that is there's a sort of a technology trade war going on between China, Europe, US, South Korea, Japan, and they have been making the news because China is starting to sort of flex its muscles. They're restricting the export of some, but I will come back to that in a minute. So, you know, the particular area for growing demand is energy transition. So between now and 2050, we're going to transition to, you know, more renewable energies. I don't think completely, because I don't think we've enough raw materials to transition completely, but the demand for the next sort of 25 years will come from the energy transition. So that's electric cars, solar power, wind power, as well as the normal demand, which is for technology, medical devices, aviation, aerospace. They have high liquidity. I'll cover that again, and they're considered inflation and crisis proof. Now, I'm just using a small example here. You'll see the chart on the right, or sorry, the box on the right. So on the left-hand side are the raw materials that are critical for transition to renewable energy. And you'll see on the sort of right side, if you will, of the left-hand chart, you'll see wind power, solar, and electric. And I've just picked one of those materials. I mean, we offer them all, but just using Austria. Austria is one small country in Europe of 9 million people. If Austria is to meet its planned transition or expansion to renewable energies, it would need currently what's 4.5 times the global production of gallium. So because of the energy transition, we see the demand for gallium increasing somewhere between 7 and 24 times between now and 2030 alone. And that will continue right to the 2040. So that's just to sort of give you some context on how much the demand is going to increase. And there will be more on that in a second. I mentioned briefly China. So China, you can see on the left, it says 80%, but actually with gallium and germanium and rare earths, that's up in some cases as high as 90% and even like 98%. China processes 98% of the world's gallium. Now, you're probably asking, well, how did this happen? And really, the simple explanation is probably two things. One, China does have about 50% of the world's reserves. And also, I think China likely understood before Europe and before the US that these raw materials would become the backbone of manufacturing in the 21st century. Proof of that, and you could Google this, you'll see that the premier of China, this is going back to 1987, he was standing on a rare earth mine, Deng Xiaoping, and he now is considered the architect of modern China. He said, the Middle East has oil, China has rare earths. Now that was a very, very shrewd prediction. That was 40 years ago when he said that. And since then, at that time in the 80s, actually, the US was producing about 60% and was the dominant market leader. But I think what happened after that as well is China decided they would become a great rare earth superpower. And during the 80s and the 90s, then the US and Europe, we were, I suppose you could say we were a little bit high, if you will, on the globalization drug. And we were thinking at the time, especially here in Europe, that, you know, these rare earths, they're complicated, they're messy. Well, why don't we just let the Chinese process them cheaply, because that's what they can do anyway, and we'll just buy them for our manufacturers. Now, that's turned out to be not a good idea, because right now these materials are critical to all nations' economic prosperity and military capabilities. And now, you know, the US, Europe, Korea, Japan. We need these raw materials and we're dependent on China. Now, the funny thing is, despite the name rare earths, they're not all that rare. There's Mountain Pass in California, for example, is producing. In Europe, there are rare earths here. However, finding them in abundance and relevant enough to mine to make it feasible or economical to mine is a different story. So at the moment, for example, all the raw materials from Mountain Pass in California are sold to China because China has all the processing capabilities. Just to give you some context on that, the human capital, the engineering expertise that existed in the US and Europe in the 80s is no longer there. So China has 39 universities graduating degrees in metallurgy and geology, whereas I think the US at one point had 28. That number went down to 14. It's now down to 12. So we don't have the expertise to all of a sudden process these rare earths, and China does. It took China a generation to consolidate its position. It's going to take Europe and the US and Korea and Japan at least sort of 15, 20 years to catch up. Now, just some quick information. This chart is very up to date. You can see it's from January 2020 until this month, May 2024. Those are some of the you know, all the raw. Over time, if you go to our website, you'll see, going back to when we first began to offer them, they're always going up in price steadily. However, we had two, you know, critical events, I suppose, in the last, say, 15 years that sort of forced them to go up, which was one, in 2012, the Japanese detained a Chinese captain of a trawler who was fishing in disputed waters. And in retaliation, China restricted the export of rare earths. So the prices went 5x in space of 5 months. Now that corrected itself, and then the prices were steadily rising again till COVID. And during 2020 and 2021, because of COVID, we had sort of, like you can see there, some of them went up 500% in the space of 2 years or 3 years. Now we've had a correction since then. So what you're looking at there, the average performance is about 20-25% of rare earths in the last 5 years. And that includes the correction. At one point, there were 34% on average. So as I said, if you do the historical look at pricing, they're consistently rising in value. And the reason for that is, you know, Apple or Siemens or BMW or Ford Motor Company, like I'm just holding my own phone here, but you can't see me. But for example, every day when you swipe your phone, you're touching indium. Indium is one of these raw materials, and you can see there indium is up 90%. So let's suppose, you know, there's a shortage of indium and the price goes up. Well, Apple will easily pay the price increase. Why is that? Because there's only maybe 0.01 grams of indium in each screen. So they're very small amounts. So it would be far greater a catastrophe to Apple to shut down production of iPhones rather than to pay an increase for indium. I hope that makes sense. So manufacturers will absorb any price increases, even when, you know, they go up 500% in 2 years. They'll just absorb it because it would cost them far much more if production slowed down, regardless of whether that's computers or phones or you know, electric cars and stuff that are coming now.
Lewis, so, just so I jump in, about a quick question. You mentioned obviously the rates there, the growth and whatnot of the metals and prices, and you said there was a correction. What was the, I guess maybe was there a primary reason for the recent correction? It's something that people would just kind of know if you're looking to get involved in this type of investment. You know, what caused that correction? Was it just hyper, you know, kind of too many people like speculating on it, or were there other actual, you know, the other factors involved in what caused the correction?
It's simply because of COVID. So during 2020, 2021, there just, you know, there was, you know, normal demand. I mean, a lot of industries didn't close down. Now some did, but the demand was there, but the supply was limited coming out of China. So the prices spiked because of that. But then when everything sort of went back to normal, the prices corrected over a period of sort of 2 years. So the prices really went up 2020, 2021, and then 2022, 2003, it sort of corrected itself. But it was just simply, coronavirus and the disruption of that. But now we feel, you'll find out in a sec, that we're an industry supplier of rare earths. We're not a sales and marketing company. So we're actually inside the industry. And you'll see in a sec, I'll be able to explain that a little bit more. You'll see some charts on the price forecasts and stuff. But
Okay.
yeah, I just on the slide right now, I'll just say basically it's the same paradigm as owning gold or silver. You physically own the asset, but I will cover the purchase process again a little bit more in a minute. But it's no different than buying gold or silver. You own the asset. It's not a piece of paper. You physically own the asset. Now, who are you buying from? So my company is Strategic Metals Invest, but my partner in Frankfurt is Tradium. So Tradium are the industry supplier, and they have been in business since 1999. So they just celebrated 25 years in business, just planning the next 25. They're based in Frankfurt. So it's only because of Tradium that this is safe and possible to do, because on a day-to-day basis, 80%, 85% of their business activities are buying and selling metals. They're buying them from producers in China, and then they resell them they've over more than 3,000 industry clients in 70 different countries. So it's important for me to stress that that's their core business. If it wasn't their core business, it wouldn't be safe to buy these raw materials, because Tradium, number one, have access to industrial grade gallium. They know, for example, there's 3/4 of a ton of rare earths in one F-35 fighter jet. Tradium will know exactly the purity levels the US Department of Defense need for gallium, if it's 99.995% or whatever it is. So you really need to buy from somebody within the industry, or it's not safe. And then the other part of that is the liquidation. When you're ready to sell, Tradium will provide, they'll mediate a sale to an industry buyer, or they'll repurchase from you for their own inventory. Now, why am I a partner with Tradium? It's because Tradium focus on what they do best, which is they buy and sell metals, and they've outsourced the sales and marketing of the private investment side to a limited number of brokers. For myself, there's a broker in Germany, there's one for France. I'm in Ireland, the UK, but we're actually looking for a partner in America. But for the moment, I'm working with the US because I speak English, a version of English anyway. But so yeah, Tradium have outsourced the sales and marketing to us, but you're purchasing from Tradium. So you're buying from an industry supplier, which will show you the purity levels, the chain of custody, the batch numbers, which is very, very important. Another unique feature of Tradium is that they're one of the few, if one of the only suppliers in Europe that have their own storage facility. You can see some photos of it there, and there's a rendering as well of an extension that's currently, the storage facility is in the banking district in Frankfurt. It's 2 levels below ground. Now we've built a 3rd level above. We have an office, we've got an area we can entertain clients. And there's over 200 metric tons of rare earths in that facility. It's the largest inventory anywhere in the world outside of China. The storage facility is 100% owned as well by Tradium, but it's a separate company and separate legal entity. So that means is when your metals are stored with Tradium, they're allocated to you in your name. You're the owner of them, and you own them in a different facility. So, and you can see there they've held an ISO 9001 QM quality management certificate consistently since 2003. So you're in basically what Tradium are doing. They're inviting you to participate in the supply chain with them. And the only reason they do that is because they are in the industry. They're an industry supplier, one of the most sort of well-known and recognized in Europe, but they sell all over the world. So I'll just cover very quickly some of the metals. So these are the technology metals, and I'll just show you, I've just highlighted sort of the where you'll see the demand, if you will. So gallium, we talked a lot about gallium already. So the gallium is the miracle cure for higher computing. So it's needed in smartphones, computers. We've in bold print permanent magnets for electric cars and wind turbines. That's key, because the little magnet that's in the speaker in your phone, the same raw materials are needed in the big battery magnets in electric cars and in the massive ones in these wind turbines. Also photovoltaics, so thin layer solar cells. Those are the next generation solar. In the very near future, I'm holding my iPhone up again. You won't need to charge your phone because you'll have solar thin film cells all over the case of the phone. Same for cars, same for buildings. So the next generation solar that's coming will need these raw materials. So again, they're I suppose you could say they're the downstream raw materials that ultimately become trillions of dollars in upstream GDP. Germanium is needed for fast fiber internet. So worldwide demand there. And then what's interesting there, where we see a lot of demand coming, is night vision. Now, you might think, well, how come? Because, you know, that's a military application. But actually, the technology used in night vision devices is the same technology now used in self-driving cars and in safety features of most sort of luxury vehicles. But that technology now, over the next few years, will filter down, and it's, you know, it'll be in all cars. So big demand coming for germanium. Now, not coincidentally, the last two metals I mentioned, germanium and gallium, are currently on restriction. What I mean is China is restricting the export of these two since August last year. That made big news in the US in about August, September, and I was invited on to CNBC. You can Google it and you'll see that, you know, people are only waking up. And as Scott mentioned, like, he's hearing more about them, is people just weren't aware of this sort of issue, if you will, with China, and the fact that the demand is about to sort of really go off the charts. Hafnium is needed for super alloys in airplane turbines. So that's what allows, you know, hafnium can perform under extremely high temperatures and extremely cold temperatures. It can still perform. Nuclear industry, where again, new semiconductor technology. So you can see a lot of them have multiple applications. Somebody recently wrote an article here in Europe where they said that the Cold War 2.0, if you will, it won't be an arms race, it'll be a semiconductor race. So the raw materials for semiconductors is very much in demand. Another demand area for hafnium will be the aerospace, sort of, I suppose you could say, space exploration is becoming a fully fledged space industry between now and 2050. Indium, I talked about indium already, touchscreen, solar cells, medical technology, nanotechnology. Rhenium, again, for airplane turbines and aerospace technology. Now, tellurium, actually, we're not recommending to investors at the moment because, you know, we've 30 years in the industry, and the reason is there's going to be actually plenty of tellurium produced. It's not, China doesn't really have a strangle there. The US actually produces a lot of tellurium. So we don't see tellurium relevant at this moment in time as an asset for private investors. Now, it is used in industry and it will be used. So we have about 40 metals we offer. We only offer about 10 to private investors because there's only 10 that are relevant. Some of them, there's no issue. Like hafnium, for example, China produces hafnium as well, but only enough for domestic use. But France and Germany also produce hafnium. So in some cases, we might say, don't buy that metal right now, such as, you know, tellurium, because we see a price possible. We see, you know, plenty of supply and no demand increase. But if somebody came to us and said, look, I don't care what you say, we want to buy tellurium, of course we sell it to you. We won't say no, but we will suggest, you know, at certain times, don't buy this metal, the price could go down. Now, the rare earth elements, these are the oxidized, the powdered form, and there's 17 of them, but we offer 4 to private investors because out of the other 17, some are not all that rare, and some of them are not hugely in demand. These are like the VIPs. And you'll see, like, for example, the charts we have here is the price forecast for the next 10 years. We did this in 2023, so until 2033. So with dysprosium, for example, electric cars and wind turbines, you'll see on the right-hand side of the chart, At the moment, you're probably reading that, oh, there's not enough electric cars, the prices are going down. But on a global scale, the reason for that is, for example, BYD, a Chinese electric car maker, in the last quarter, the first quarter of 2024, overtook Tesla for the first time as they delivered more electric cars. So there's more electric cars on the global market. Tesla, I think, as well, was promising a sort of $25,000 electric car for many years, but Volkswagen just pipped them to the post, and you can now buy a $25,000 all electric Volkswagen. So what you see on the right, though, and you're going to see with these 4 rare earths I'm about to show, that sometime between maybe in 2027, 2030, 2031, that's when all the infrastructure will finally be here for this energy transition. That's when, electric car, the demand for these parts will really, as you can see, it's going right off the chart. And the reason for that is there won't be enough to go around. There just will not be. So these predictions, by the way, are not ours. They're from price reporting agencies. This one is from Argus Media. But if you look at Fast Markets or Asia Metals, any of these price reporting agencies, they're all predicting the same thing. Depending on the raw material, as you can see, they're increasing now, but they will really go off the charts between now and sort of 2030 and beyond. Same thing for neodymium. Neodymium can hold 1,300 times its own weight independently. It's the superpower of magnets. And again, that will be needed in wind turbines, electric motors. You can see as well how the demand and supply is going to go. Praseodymium aircraft engines allows aircraft engines to, for peak performance. Again, electric motors, smartphones, wind turbines, TV, cell phone, color displays. And again, you can see where the price is going in the next sort of 3 to 5 years. Terbium for solar, high temperature fuel cells. You can see there, actually, Scott, you asked me earlier, or somebody put in a question, what caused the spike. Now look at terbium there. Just when COVID hit, it went up 500% in 3 years, from 2019 to about 2022. And then after COVID, when supply was available again, it sort of corrected. And it's now sort of back at its normal price, if you will. But you can see the graph that it's going to increase steadily over the next 5, 10, 15 years. So just a quick summary. Some of the key benefits are that you physically own the asset, just like gold and silver. Your asset value is based purely on the supply and demand. I don't think anybody would argue demand is not going to increase. And if you do your homework on China, you'll see that they are pretty much now the rare earth superpower. So if they decide if things escalate and they restrict more or ban, you'll see price increases. Now, why that will be beneficial to you is if things escalate, and I suppose I'll explain. Firstly, you see at the bottom there, we recommend more 100% that you store in our storage facility, and I explain why is because these are industry metals. I had a client recently in the US asked me that he said he likes to keep his gold close to home, and I think he meant he has it in the backyard buried or something. But the point he was making was he wanted to take delivery of the raw materials, and I said, look, you own the metals. Once you pay for them, they're yours. If you do want to move them to the US, you can. However, you're going to have to pay all the transportation costs. You'll have to pay import duties, and likely US customs will want to know, why are you importing industrial grade gallium or hafnium? And they might not even allow you to do it if you can't show any good reason. So you'll literally cost yourself a lot more money, and you'll really complicate the ownership. And then if you manage to get them through and you have them stored, when you come back to us in 3 years or 5 years to liquidate them, they'll have to be retested again, because the chain of custody is so important with these raw materials. So no industry buyer, whether that's Apple or Siemens or whoever, they won't purchase even from us if the chain of custody is not intact. So when you buy from us and you store in our sister company, the chain of custody is intact, because you have an invoice from Tradium, which is a recognized industry supplier. So you know that recognizes that they're industry grade, and you have a safekeeping receipt or a credited account statement in the storage facility to show that you've had them stored in Metlock. Now, Metlock, you're fully insured, but it's also REACH certified. REACH is an acronym in Europe for the recognition that Metlock stores industrial grade raw materials, and they're recognized for it. So even though you're the owner of them and you've owned them for 5 years, your chain of custody in terms of the industry is completely intact, which means they can be liquidated on a day's notice to any industry buyer. And we would also do that for you.
Lewis, if I can, it's a question maybe on the last slide, because you're talking about supply, demand, and prices. Someone did have a question when it comes to some of this, is what would happen if my investment in a rare metal goes down because of an increase in supply? Is there a chance that I can hedge my asset with other assets in the portfolio? So if you could talk maybe a minute about that. I'm assuming maybe with diversification, you wouldn't recommend necessarily someone placing all their eggs into one particular metal and hedging them out a little bit. But maybe if you can address that, and also just you said that the supply is considered somewhat finite or critical. What are the, I guess, risks to supply in general? Is it, or the supply and demand factors of maybe other metals that people discover or find that, hey, this can actually do better, it can perform this function better than what we have now. But I'll let you answer those questions. I have a couple others too as we wrap up.
Yeah, that's a very good point, Scott. You're right. I mean, one issue could be substitution. I mentioned indium. You can swipe your phone. Maybe somebody will come up with a better technology for that and a different raw material. Luckily enough, though, that they all do have, as you saw, they have multiple applications. So, but that could be something that might come up. With supply and demand at this moment in time, like in the last, funny enough, just in February 2024, China has become, it's not a great sort of rare earth country, it's a rare earth superpower. And at the moment, China literally controls the demand of most of these raw materials. However, in the US, in the last few years, you have the Inflation Reduction Act, which, despite the name, is all about energy transition. In Europe, just came into effect this week, you have the Critical Raw Materials Act. So the US and Europe have realized we have to wean our dependence off China. So that's going to happen. In fact, Lynas Corp, which is the largest producer of rare earths outside of China, they're based in Australia. They're building a facility with the US Department of Defense, I think in either Texas or Florida. They may have already started building it, but so they can process rare earth. So you will see domestic production increase in the US. And, well, we think in Europe, I mean, but as we say here in Europe, like, people like to drive their Teslas, but they don't want the mining in the backyard. So there's about 1 million tons of rare earths north of Sweden, but I don't know if politically the political parties will allow that to happen. It's, I'm in Ireland, it's really not my business. But the thing is, like, for example, in Europe as well, because of Russia's aggression in Ukraine, we've been very dependent on Russia for oil and gas. And so we're sort of accelerating our energy transition, because we cannot be just dependent on one nation for these critical raw materials. So what will happen, you'll definitely see, you might even see in the US, actually, companies going into coal mines that are no longer being worked and getting the mine tailings because they have rare earths in them. Now, so I suppose, over the next 10 or 15 years, you'll see, more supply as well. However, there's a window of opportunity here of 10 or 15 years, because let's say, for example, I think they're talking about discovery of rare earths in Wyoming. Now, they've sort of jumped the gun a bit. It's what we call a virgin discovery, and what that means is they still have to find out what are the levels. So there could be 20% rare earths there, but there could be 0.01%, if you know what I mean. There's a lot of waste as well. So, but there is there's a $390 billion in subsidies available in the US to get into this industry, but it's going to take time, and that's why investors can profit over the next 5 or 10 years. After that, I don't know. But of course, the US labor costs will be higher. Europe, the labor costs will be higher. So, you know, I suppose what I'm saying is there's a very good window for the next 5 or 10 years, maybe 15. And then after that, you know, who knows? But definitely the US and Europe will not be dependent on China in 15 years from now. Now, also, US is looking at Latin America and, you know, Africa. So they're, again, despite the name, they're not all that rare, but it would take, if somebody made a rare earth discovery today, it would take an investment of about $1 billion, and it'll take about 15 years before they're in phones. So that's to give you an idea of the window. So at the moment, we are the only industry supplier that actually offers this to private investors. As I mentioned to you, like, you could say the private investment side is our, as you guys in America say, our side hustle. So it's Tradium side business. Their main business is in the industry. Now, if somebody is thinking about doing it, what you'll see here, here's some red flags to watch out for. If you buy raw materials from us and you keep them for 5 years in the vault, they'll still be in the original packaging from the manufacturer at all that times, because no industry buyer will buy them unless they're in the industry packaging. So I'll let you have a read of that, but I'll finish up. I definitely didn't make that in 20 minutes, but I'll sort of just put my contact information there. If anybody wants to, I can present this again to somebody one-on-one. They can email me there, Louis, L-O-U-I-S, at strategicmetalsinvest.com. I have a US number, not number here in Ireland. And our website is strategicmetalsinvest.com. And we have had clients, of course, purchase using their self-directed IRA. And if somebody was interested, we can connect, and I can recommend as well. Scott can handle that as well. So I'll leave it back to you, Scott.
Yeah, thanks, Louis. So I think, you know, what kind of had a couple questions come in here. One of them was, how easy is it to buy and sell the metals? And again, kind of earlier in the presentation, I touched on using the LLC from an IRA perspective, because I think, again, if you're going to invest in these, a lot of times you might be setting up a storage account overseas. You might have, you know, be buying and selling the metals fairly, you know, who knows if you're buying to then, you know, sell to somebody who's going to use the product fairly soon, you want to hold it for longer. It can make it much easier from that perspective if you're using your IRA to set up an LLC. But in general, I guess maybe the question is, how easy is it to buy and sell the metals? I know you touched on it a little bit, but is it really setting up kind of a storage account? How would someone go about doing that with you, whether they were using their IRA or not?
Okay, so it's very quick, actually. It can be a purchase can be completed in 3 to 5 working days if needed, and also a liquidation. And how it works is, let's say somebody said to me, you know, we want to go ahead and invest, you know, $50,000 or $25,000, and we want a sort of an even spread of the rare earth. So the first thing we do is we send an offer to the prospective client, which is binding on our side, but not on the client. So that means the investor can get a look at exactly what it is they're buying, and that would detail the purity levels, the chain of custody, and stuff like that. And once they've reviewed the offer, if they'd like to proceed, they just tell us via email, yeah, I'll go ahead, and then we just send an invoice with banking instructions and an order confirmation, and that can be all done in 3 to 5 working days. Now, if the goods are already in the inventory, they'll be allocated right away, or alternatively, they can take sort of 30 to 60 days to come in. But the transaction itself can complete in 3 to 5 working days. And the liquidation is the same. If one of my clients came to me tomorrow and said, I want to sell everything or half of what I have, we then would make an offer to that client that day, that working day, if possible. And if once they've reviewed the offer and if they're happy to proceed, we send them a sales contract. Once they sign that, they'll receive the funds within 10 days from that date.
Gotcha. Okay, great. Another question someone had just said, where in Ireland is your office? They will be over in Dublin and Belfast in about the middle of June, and just wanted to, if it maybe it's something they can connect with you, obviously individually on, but
yeah, no, that question. Please send me an email, and I'm actually from Dublin, but I'm in Tipperary. My office is in Tipperary. But our main office is in Frankfurt, so I'm back in Frankfurt's less than a 2-hour flight from Dublin. So I'm over and back to Germany quite a lot. So the business, if you will, is in Central Europe. I'm the agent for Ireland, UK, and North America at the moment. But anybody coming to visit, I'd meet them in Dublin. They're probably going to see the Titanic thing in Belfast, I'd say. But yeah, please, even just on a personal level, I'm always happy to meet people and meet for a coffee and tell you a bit about Dublin and Ireland. And, there could even be a pint of Guinness involved,
That sounds good. So, yeah, but great. Louis, thank you again for your time today. I think some great information on something. Like I said, I think from the time we last had you on till now, I've seen this topic come up much more in the news and obviously there's a lot of geopolitical concerns obviously surrounding these materials and how important they are to our industry. And how we're growing as a society. So. We're very happy to have had you back on. Probably look to maybe revisit this again in several months as this industry continues to grow. So if you have questions for Louis, please reach out to him. His information is here on this slide, his email, his website, his phone number as well. I'm sure he'd be happy to like I said, take some time, explain things in more detail to you, or if you're going to head over that way, meet with you as well. So again, Louis, thank you very much. Any kind of closing thoughts you had for us today on the topic?
Thank you very much, Scott. I know we've been planning it for a couple of months actually. So thank you for all the organization and the planning. And I've been really happy to be here and happy to come back anytime at all. It's a pleasure.
All right, good deal. All right, thanks again. Thanks everybody for participating live in the event today. If you're listening to this on the recorded, please reach out to myself or to Louis with any questions that you have about the content. We'll be happy to answer those questions for you. So again, Louis, thank you again very much for your time, and we'll look forward to having you on again.
Thank you, Scott. All the best.